Right then, let's get on with making a windscreen now. So we're going to do that by creating a new scene, but we're not take a full copy this time. We're just going to choose the new scene button and then select new from the flyout there. And we have a completely empty scene. You can see there's nothing in our outliner, so we've got to add the whole lot in. So start off by adding a camera. And we will switch that camera to an orthographic style camera. I don't think it really makes an awful lot of difference in this kind of case, but just on the off chance our perspective camera would distort any of our interface elements, we'll change that to an orthographic camera. With that camera selected, if we switch to the item tab here, and we will set the rotation values to 0 on all 3 axes, so that it's just pointing directly down. With no rotation on the camera, it'll be a lot easier for us to line up the buttons we're going to create here. Now, I didn't expect it to be black by default on the background. I have set the background of my world here on level 1 and 2. In this tab here, in the world properties, I've set the background to this color. So I'm just going to click on the swatch and then click hex, and that gives me an easy way to copy and paste this color across. It gives us the hex value, the hexadecimal color. So that's pretty handy. So if we switch back to our new scene and go into the world properties, we can select new, and under color, select that default gray, paste over the color that I have for the world in my other levels, and we're good to go. Right, so we'll start adding as quickly as we can. I'll try not to keep you too long. Just quickly as we can, we'll start adding some buttons. And shall we make, let's just make them from scratch. We'll start off with the buttons. So we'll start off with a plane. I need to move it down a little bit so that we can see it through this camera. So that's y-axis. To scale it maybe a little bit on the x, we need to add some text, and then we'll find out. Move it over to the side, we need a material. I'm hoping to use the same material we used on the interface. Let's just check that. So we'll go back to scene. That's the problem with not labeling your materials. We'll have a look. That is material 001, so call that button. It's not essential that these things are consistent, but it will be helpful when you come to write up some of your justification. And then we've got score text. So I'm just renaming the background of my button and the score text so I can find it in different scenes. Okay, so we can reuse the button material. Shift S to pop our cursor onto the selected object. Shift A to add in some text. We'll give it our text material, score text. Oops, this is going to be A again. Yeah, so our button's going to be much different. Oops. So G, S to scale that. Oh, we could make it that size, I suppose. Why not? A again. And I'm actually going to set the text to, I don't know if I did this earlier on, but if I set the text in the physics box here, in the physics tab, if I set it to no collision, it's set by default to no collision. If you make sure your text is set to no collision, and we add the interactivity on our button graphic here, then we'll be good to go. So I'm just going to select these two. So just selecting the button and shift selecting the text. Shift D to duplicate that. Duplicate it over on the x-axis. And we'll edit this text to say quit. And then just center it, G and X. And that's also no collision. So on this button, we need some simple logic. We need 2 mouse sensors, one for left button, one for mouse over. So it'll only be active when the left button is over and down. And we are going to switch scene. So we'll line these up, link them up. All right, so when the left button is down and over, set scene, level 1. Let's just test that. And what do you know? We've got no cursor. So every time you add a new scene, if you want to have the cursor displayed, you will need to jump back into the render properties. Just click mouse cursor. So P, play again, takes us back to level 1. And then we'll do the same thing on quit. 2 mouse sensors, left button and mouse over. And I mean, this is kind of pointless. This is just fulfilling the requirements of the specification. What we're doing. I mean, we could just go straight to game. So we'll use the game actuator, link up our logic bricks, and we want to quit game. Okay. I think we do need some kind of graphic here. I'm just going to select everything and move it down on the x-axis a little bit rather than having it, not x-axis, down on the y-axis. That gives us a bit more space to play with. I'm just going to rotate out. Make sure the 3D cursor is on the camera. If it's not, snap to the camera, select the camera, Shift S, cursor to selected, and we will drop in a cube. We could just reuse one of our cubes from level 1 or 2, but I don't think it'll make much difference. While we're at it, let's chuck a light in here, just a point light. Let me see how we want to orient this. So let's move it across on the Y and then on the Z so that it's kind of above our cube. And we'll play about the settings in a second. Let's go into camera mode, select our cube, scale it down a bit. We need to create this kind of isometric view of our cube. So we are going to come to the item tab, and under the rotation values, we want to give it about 28 in X, about 42 in Y, and about 19 in Z. It should give us roughly a kind of isometric view. Now we can have a look at where the lamp wants to go. We move it. Let me see. Just move the light about so that we're getting some light on that cube here. That's looking quite nice. We're going to give this a material anyway, so give the cube the player material. We might want to make that lamp a little bit brighter, so we could select the point lamp in the outliner or select it in the 3D view and just play with the power, 100. That'll do. We want to see the 3 dimensions, we want to have 3 different tones on each face of this isometric cube. And then, to be honest, it could probably do with being a bit smaller. Just to give us some space, this is our win screen. We also need some U-win text. So I'm just going to do Shift S, cursor to selected over here. Shift A, add in some more text, or we could duplicate this one. So Shift D and duplicate it, move it up on the Y-axis. Tab in edit mode. U-win, capitals. Scale it. And there was all sorts of ways that we can play around with text in Blender. But for the time being, we just want to make sure everything is nicely lined up. We've got a very simple and consistent color scheme across all the different screens, and that will do. Now, I think we should probably have some kind of animation here. So I am just going to jump to the dope sheet for a second and into the action editor. Well, this time we'll try not creating a new action and see what happens. Sure, that's not the right way to do it, but we may as well try. So we'll make this character just move up and down. The character's one, let's make him excited about that fact. Right, so we'll start, let's move your cube into sensible starting position, and then let's keyframe that position. So I and location, and then I want you to come down into the dope sheet or into the action editor, grab that keyframe, left click it, shift D to duplicate it, move it on a second, 30 frames. So we've duplicated its position at keyframe 1 to keyframe 30. So it's going to be in the same position in both keyframes, halfway across. Let's move it up in the y-axis and keyframe that. So it'll go up from the starting point to here and back again. And if we set it to loop in our logic, that'll pass as a windscreen. If we want to preview that, by default, our timeline or action editor gives us 250 frames. So if I press spacebar to play that, we're going to get 200 odd frames of nothing. So we can, what's an easy way to, we come to our render settings and choose under frame range here, what was it, 30 seconds, 30 frames, sorry. Put the playhead back to the beginning, we can sort of get a little preview here of how that might look. That's fine. That's fine. Right, spacebar, stop. Back to our Logic Bricks editor. Sensor, always. Actuator, action. Link them up. Play Cube 005 action. We're getting lazy, not naming stuff. We want it to start in frame 0, end in frame 30. And we don't want it to just play and then stop. We want it to loop. So under our play mode here, loop. Never sure which one's right. We'll try loop end. As long as it keeps on looping after that first second of animation, we're good. All right, that'll do for the time being. You can get experimental, add in a bit of scaling, add in some rotation, animate the colors. Every value that exists within Blender can be animated. So go wild. Right, we need a you lose screen as well. We haven't actually set up any conditions for this character to die yet, so we'll do that also. But very quickly, let's chuck in a you lose screen. So we're going to duplicate. Let's call it you win first. Oh, the caps lock on. And let's make a full copy. Let's call it you lose. Let's change our text. Caps lock back on. Everything else is fine for the time being. We maybe don't want the animation to be quite as jolly. Let's scale that cube down until he disappears. So here, we'll just remove that action from our inner. We're in a you lose scene now. We can remove that action. We'll create a new one. So back to our dope sheet again. We could split the screen. Let's try it. And add a dope sheet here, so we don't have to keep switching back and forward. Right, so action editor. Get rid of this action. We'll make a new one where we add a location. No, a scale. So this is a new type of keyframe. We're not going to animate its location up and down or round and round. We're going to animate its scale properties. So we'll choose a scale keyframe here in frame 1 and frame 30. Let's scale it down to nothing and add a scale to that. And then really we want it to completely disappear. So I'm going to zoom in, scale it down even smaller. And replace that keyframe. Okay, well, let's name it this time. You lose. Caps lock on, why not? And we want this cube to always play the you lose action. And this time we don't want it to loop, we just want it to stop at frame 30. So we'll just choose play, and hopefully when we lose, you'll just get that. And we can accompany that with some fitting sound effects later on, and that will also do just fine. So a couple more quick things to do before we finish up. We need to set up the conditions which would lead to a win screen or a lose screen. So if we just jump back to level 2, let's have a look at the logic here on the cube. So control spacebar and then just zoom in a little bit. So we have it colliding with the coin, playing a sound, adding 1 to our score property, sending the message got coin in level 2. So we need to check when we have 6 points. In our case, at the moment, 6 points. So we get 3 points from level 1. And at the moment, the cube checks the score in level 1 that it equals 3. And we've got this slightly convoluted process whereby we send a message 3. We have a sensor actuator that checks when that message is finished, sets our scene to level 2. So we need something similar in level 2. So the one slight problem, it's not really a problem, when level 2 is initialized, when it starts, it will reset that score variable to 0 again. Let's just check that. I think we've already checked that. If we press play, score, the score variable goes up 3, and although the score that's displayed on our interfaces, we've resolved that issue, the score variable is back to 0. So all we need to do is initialize it, reset it to 3 on level 2. So make sure you're in level 2 scene and set the on with the cube selected on the score property, set it to 3. Let's just test it when we press play on level 2. Our score is 3. Okay, so if we play straight through from level 1, our interface is 3 and our score variable is 3. So we need to check that the score equals to 6 in our case. This is all dependent on how many collectible objects you have. You know what? I don't think we need our action editor anymore. I'll just merge them together quickly, and then we will check on level 2. Make sure you're on level 2 here with the cube selected. We're going to check if the property score is equal to 6. And we don't need the convoluted combination of actuators that we had in level 1 here. All we need to do is set our scene to the win scene. So check that property is equal to property score is equal to 6. Set scene, set it to you win. And let's check that. Whether our score that's displayed or not, as long as our score variable is 6, it should be good. Perfect. How do we die? Right, so in my case, I'm going to go back to level 1. I'm just going to add a kind of death plane here if we fall off the map. So I'm just adding in a plane, and what am I doing? I'm adding in a plane. I'm just going to hit G and Z and just drop it in below ground level. And we need to give this a game property, death. That'll do. And if the player collides with death, we need to go to the lose screen. So add a sensor, collision, death. You could just quit the game, but we need to use these different screens to meet the requirements of the brief. So if you die, If you collide with the property death, we're going to set the scene, you lose. Now, I probably should have set this up earlier because we'll have to do the same thing on level 2. You know what? I'm not a big copy and paster in Blender. Let's see if it works. Control C, level 2, Control V. It does. Now let's add this back in quickly. Collision, death. Now you can make all sorts of different conditions for death. You could add something within your level that your player collides with. We could have some very basic enemies in there. All sorts of things. That's for you to experiment with. So we've now got our death plane on level 1 and level 2. So if we fall off the map, we'll go to the lose screen. If we get a score of 6, we'll go to the win screen. Next thing we have to do is set up the main menu screen, and then we're ultimately done with the generic structure of the game.